We've all heard the old proverb, don't swear off from poverty and prison. But surely not everyone has thought about the meaning of this folk wisdom. In this video, we'll talk about a person who truly experienced the full meaning of this proverb. There is one person in Russia who has been very unfortunate. In just a couple of hours, he became the most unfortunate citizen in the country. But everything seems so good. It was just the beginning for him. The son of a high-ranking officer from a law enforcement agency, a successful financier who was already nearing the peak of his business career, owning as many as 6 Russian banks. And then, suddenly, such a misfortune. This narrative will be about him. And then suddenly, such a misfortune. A man was Russia's unluckiest. A man who, due to mistakes, became very unlucky in the Russian state. His name is Matvey Urin. Became the most unfortunate citizen of the Russian state. His name is Matvey Urin. On a beautiful Sunday evening, November 14th, 2010, 34-year-old Matvey, in his expensive and beautiful Mercedes, was on his way to a restaurant accompanied by his personal security. In his successful life, everything was going well, and he was in great spirits, planning to visit his favorite place, where he, like a true master of life, would savor exquisite dishes from a renowned chef. Matvey Urin was annoyed by a BMW driver not yielding. On his road was a BMW, whose driver didn't yield to Matvey. He had no intention of getting out of Matvey's lane, even though Matvey was flashing his headlights. The banker lost his temper, understandably. He refused to leave Matvey Urin's lane despite the flashing headlights. The banker lost his temper at the overconfident driver in a modest car. Looking around and confirming that the overconfident driver was alone, the banker completely lost his temper, and it was understandable. How can it be that some idiot in a modest car isn't giving way to such a cool guy in a Mercedes? Without thinking twice, Urin grabbed his radio and ordered his bodyguards, who were following him in a van, to deal with the arrogant driver. Volkswagen, deal with the jerk. The security reacted instantly. The BMW was blocked by the Volkswagen, and several strong guys with bats in their hands got out of the van. They swaggered up to the car and, using profanity and all their eloquence, asked the driver to step out for a chat. He refused. They eloquently asked the driver to step out for a chat. He refused. After which the guys smashed the driver's side window and forcibly pulled him out. The guy was tough and kicked a guard in the face. This angered the guards, who beat him and smashed his car windows and mirrors. Kick one of the tough guys right in the face? This completely infuriated the overconfident security guards, and after giving the kid a good beating, they also smashed all the windows and mirrors on his car. Well, how else? A loser stood before them, whom they can do whatever they want with. Victims must submit, with whom they, of course, can do whatever they want. And the victims are only allowed to submit without protest. That's what they thought, enjoying the process of beating him up. A crowd against one, but it turned out to be not so simple. The kid turned out to be no ordinary guy. He was a Dutch citizen named Jorrit Faassen. But for Matvey Urin's fun team, even that wasn't a problem. To their great misfortune, Faassen turned out to be the son-in-law of the president. The Russian Federation is a country. Jorrit Faassen, born in 1980, is a citizen of the Netherlands and by education an architect. Putin's inner circle kept the personal life of Maria Vorontsova, the eldest daughter of the Russian president, a secret for a long time. Although Putin's secretary Dmitry Peskov denied connection between Putin's daughter, Faassen, Maria Vorontsova, wed a Dutchman. Jorrit Faassen appeared in Moscow mid-2000s. She changed her last name to Maria Faassen and even has scientific publications under that name. Jorrit Faassen started appearing in Moscow in the mid-2000s. And he immediately took on prominent positions in Russian state corporations and companies owned by members of Vladimir Putin's inner circle. He began his rapid career with a high position at Gazprom Bank Investia, then became the vice president of Stroytransgaz, another subsidiary of the gas monopoly. The publication also learned that Jorrit Faassen, since 2011, had been living with Maria Vorontsova in the respectable suburb of Leiden-Portschot. The residents of this town occasionally saw the couple at the local Albert Heijn supermarket. On August 15th, 2012, Maria gave birth to a son. Putin's grandson was born in Moscow at the Central Clinical Hospital under the administration of the president. The actual recognition by the Kremlin that Maria Putina and Jorrit Faassen are married only happened after the West imposed sanctions on them. In the Kremlin, after the sanctions were imposed against the married couple, they promised to respond to the West as they see fit. Having dealt with the Dutchman, the banker and his security slowly drove off to continue their business. Faassen didn't bother to contact the police. He only made one single call to his beloved woman, Maria Vorontsova Putina. In the conversation with her, he talked about the incident and informed her of the license plate numbers of the attacking vehicles. From that moment on, a different life began for Matvey Urin and his valiant security detail, which was drastically different from the previous one. Just an hour later, the banker's convoy was stopped, and it was not the police who made the arrest, but FSO officers. This event was led by Vladimir Kolokoltsev himself. "Do you recognize me?" Urin was confronted. "Remember who you hit. Passport," he demanded. "Do you recognize me?" Matvey swallowed the lump in his throat and could only nod affirmatively. "Now you will remember for the rest of your life the person you beat up an hour ago. Hand over your passport," Kolokoltsev barked. After receiving the document, head of Main Internal Affairs Directorate called someone reported, "I have him and his documents." Like Matvey Urin, Kolokoltsev began a new life. After this, a year later, Vladimir Alexandrovich became Minister of Internal Affairs. A new life. A little over a year later, Vladimir Alexandrovich became the Minister of Internal Affairs of the country. Meanwhile, Urin found himself in Lefortovo prison, where criminal charges against him came pouring in like from a cornucopia. Initially, Urin was charged under Article 213, Part 2, for hooliganism using objects as weapons, committed by a group of individuals. Along with him, 5 of his security guards from Volkswagen were also implicated. Alexei Cherkasov, Andrei Frolov, Alexei Kuznetsov, Nikolai Kiprianov, and Andrei Semidochenko. By the time the criminal case was handed over to the court, 3 more charges were added to the case. 33 Section 3. The organizer, as the most dangerous figure among the accomplices. Article 116 Part 2, organizing beatings and intentional damage to property. And Article 327 Part 3, using a knowingly forged document. According to the investigation, while driving, Urin's driver used fake documents that allowed them to bypass traffic police checkpoints. An important clarification. Some media claim that the verdicts in this case were handed down in record time. Almost a month after the arrest, that is, in December 2010. But that's not true. Kunsevsky, Court of Moscow. The sentences for the defendants in the case were announced 5 months later, in February 2011. Banki.ru sentenced Urin to 3 years in prison, while his security guards received sentences ranging from 2.5 to 4.5 years. It's worth noting that neither Urin nor his guards understood that the person they had beaten was Putin's son-in-law. They beat Putin's son-in-law, Jorrit Faassen, Putin's son-in-law. They thought Jorrit Faassen was not ordinary and believed he was an FSB relative. The Russian president hid his family's life of someone from the FSB. The president of Russia kept his family's private life so hidden. Even Urin's father, who was a veteran of the GRU, couldn't help him with this problem. But let's return to the court's verdict against the banker and his security guards. In principle, one could say that Urin was very lucky, as with such a sentence, he could expect to be released on parole by the summer of 2012. But the banker's dreams were not meant to come true. The Moscow City Court granted the prosecutor's appeal, who believed that the sentence for Urin was too lenient. The case was sent for reconsideration. During this time, Urin and his team apologized to the victim. They offered a generous compensation for the material damages. Interestingly, the victim Jorrit Faassen never showed up in court. Instead, lawyers were present, who did not wish to reach a settlement. Owner of BMW did not show up in court. Natalia Shikalinskaya, whose car was being driven by Faassen under a power of attorney. She sent the defendants a bill for the car repairs through her lawyers, amounting to 16,000 rubles. But let's get back to Urin and his team. As a result of the review of the case following the prosecutor's appeal, the Kuntsevo District Court increased the banker's prison sentence to 4.5 years in a general regime. Sentences for security guards remained the same. If anyone thought that the saga of the former Master of Life ended here, you are mistaken. This was just the beginning. His lawyers barely had time to appeal this court decision. As Urin was charged with another article of the Criminal Code, Part 4 of Article 159, fraud on a particularly large scale. Based on this, Matvey Urin was sent to a penal colony, and he remained in Butyrka prison, where he was transferred after the verdict. The new case turned out to be more complicated than here the beating of Putin's son-in-law. All of his banks had their licenses revoked, and Urin himself was charged with fraudulent actions involving the shares of the banks he controlled: Slaviansky Etradu Bank, Yekaterinburg Bank, Ural Finance Prom Bank, Chelyabinsk, Mint House, and Russia Don Bank. The investigation accused the banker of embezzling 16 billion rubles. Interestingly, just a month before these events, all the mentioned banks underwent a scheduled inspection by the Central Bank of Russia, during which no violations were found. Urin himself did not admit his guilt and claimed that some shadow investor could be behind the fraud. Ivan Lyubimtsev, in whose interests these financial institutions were acquired. In addition, the defendant emphasized that he was being tried for the third time for what happened in the fall of 2010. He found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. The judges found Matvey Urin's arguments unconvincing, and they added another 3 years to his sentence. Banker faced a 7.5-year sentence. He was to be sent to the colony. New case materials emerged about his manipulations. The committee charged him under Article 174.1. And so, the banker who had been sitting in custody was supposed to be sent to the penal colony. However, new case materials arrived regarding his manipulations with the multi-bank he controlled. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation charged him under Article 174.1, Part 3, money laundering by an organized group. The case was transferred in February 2015 to the Presnensky District Court, where they weren't in much of a hurry to hold hearings for Urin. There were 8 postponements of court hearings in this process. As a result, the banker nearly broke the record for prison time. He was in the detention center for almost 5 years. To be precise, 56 months. Only militants who attacked Nalchik spent more time in prison than him. He was nicknamed Banky Ru by Russian media. They spent 9 years in pretrial detention. Russian media even nicknamed him Banky Ru, the lifelong defendant. In addition, while Urin was under investigation in the detention center, his banking empire was collapsing like a house of cards. Considering all the circumstances of the case, the Presnensky court increased Urin's prison sentence to 8.5 years. An interesting point. While the banker was in the detention center, the prison administration, so to speak, was adding to his personal file 29 disciplinary sanctions for violating internal regulations. Urin himself claimed that not only did he not violate the rules, but he did not even know about these disciplinary sanctions. Prison blocked Matvey Urin's early release. This was done to reduce his chances of early release for good behavior. Matvey Urin had none during his subsequent time in the penal colony. The banker's rough patch ended in 2018. It was in this year that the State Duma passed a law stating that 1 day in pretrial detention is equivalent to 1.5 days. In the colony, the record holder for time spent in prison cells, Urin, had his sentence recalculated, and in 2018, he was released from Tambov Colony number 3. He was already a struggling financier and a completely ruined person. All that he had left were just debts from various court rulings. He spent just under 8 years behind bars. After his release, Urin didn't stay in the country for long. Realizing that he wouldn't be left in peace, he moved abroad for good.